The wind came before the wolves did, and Mara had learned long ago that both were warnings she was not allowed to heed. She pressed her back against the granite shelf and counted the sounds in the dark. 6 of them, she had confirmed that much before the storm swallowed the last of the light. 6 small bodies, none older than perhaps 3 months if she read their milk teeth right, and all of them trembling with the particular violence of cold that was no longer discomfort, but had crossed into something more dangerous. The snow cave was her doing. She had carved it herself, on her knees, in the drift that had built up against the leeward face of the Keldrath ridge, scooping with her forearms because she had left her pack at the base camp when she heard the first whimper, and she was not the kind of woman who heard a whimper and kept walking. That had been her problem, her entire life. She was not the kind of woman who kept walking. She pulled the nearest pup closer against her chest and felt its heartbeat rapid, irregular, afraid. Its fur was the color of birch bark in winter, pale with dark striations, and it was small enough that she could cup it in both hands if she chose, though she did not choose. She let it sprawl across her lap instead, and then arranged the others around it, and against her legs, and under the hem of her coat, which she had unbuttoned as far as the cold allowed, sacrificing her own warmth to make a wall of heat between them and the night. She was an Omega. She had no rank to call upon, no pack title that would soften the cold. What she had was body heat and a stubbornness that had long since stopped distinguishing itself from courage. The storm outside pressed and howled. Mara closed her eyes and breathed slowly, deliberately. The way she had been taught in the mountain clinics during her 3 seasons as a wandering healer's assistant, breathe slowly, and the body believes it is safe, even when it is not. The pups responded. She felt them settle by increments, the shaking growing less catastrophic, the heartbeats she could feel through her palms finding slightly slower rhythms. She had not meant to be on the Keldrath Ridge at all. She had meant to be 3 settlements east of here, in a village called Vorn, where the healer she sometimes worked for had told her there was a family willing to trade roof and board for a capable pair of hands through the winter months. Capable pair of hands, that was what she had become. Mara Solis, former ward of the Ashvale Pack, rejected by their council at 22, in a ceremony she still could not think about, without a pressure behind her sternum that she could not properly name as grief or rage, or simply the specific ache of being told you were not enough. Former ward, current wanderer, occasional healer's assistant, capable pair of hands. She was 26 now. She had been building herself a life out of the materials available. It was not a beautiful life, but it was hers, and she was fiercely, quietly committed to it. The storm had different plans. The storm had rolled off the peaks with the suddenness that only high-altitude winter could produce, and she had been caught between the ridge and the valley, with darkness coming fast and visibility dropping to arm's length. She could have pressed on toward the valley. She had thought about it seriously for approximately 30 seconds before she heard the sound that was not wind. And now she was here, underground in a pocket of her own making, with 6 werewolf pups whose pack she could not identify and whose fate she would not speculate about. And the cold was a living thing that pressed at the entrance to the cave and wanted very much to come in. She told it, silently but with conviction, that it was not welcome. The hours passed the way hours always pass in extreme cold, not linearly, but in surges and strange stillnesses, time losing its reliable texture and becoming instead a series of moments that felt both endless and suddenly over. She dozed at intervals, jerking awake each time to make the count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all breathing, all warm enough. She fed them from the emergency rations in her coat pocket, small strips of dried meat she always carried in case of exactly this kind of situation. And they ate with the frantic single-mindedness of the very young and the very hungry. She spoke to them quietly as she fed them. No particular words, just sound the low, continuous murmur that she had learned worked on frightened animals and frightened children and, she suspected, on frightened adults who would never admit it. By the deepest part of the night, she had a name for each of them in her head. The pale one on her lap was Birch. The dark one pressed against her left side, who had been the last to stop shaking, was Dusk. The two who had curled together in a knot near her knees were River and Stone. The one who kept trying to climb her as if she were a hill, repeatedly falling back and trying again with undiminished optimism, was Summit. And the smallest, the one she was most worried about, the one whose breathing had a slight rasp to it that she monitored with a healer's careful attention, that one she called January, for the particular quality of its tenacity. She did not know she was naming them as if they were hers. She did not know that yet. By morning, the storm had broken. She knew it by the change in the pressure at the cave entrance, the slight shift in the sound of the wind, and then by the quality of the silence that followed. Storms on the Keldrath ridge did not depart gently. They simply stopped, as if some enormous decision had been made elsewhere, and the world returned to itself, white and rinsed and searingly cold but still. Mara had been awake for 2 hours before the storm broke, watching the entrance and keeping the count and thinking, with the careful practicality that had become her primary mode of survival, about what she was going to do next. She was going to need to move the pups. She could not stay in the snow cave. What had been adequate shelter in a storm was a slow refrigerator in its aftermath. And she needed to get them somewhere warmer before the day advanced, and they used up what small reserves of warmth they had rebuilt through the night. She did not know whose pups they were. She did not know the territory well enough to know where she might take them. She knew that carrying 6 werewolf pups down an exposed ridge alone in the aftermath of a blizzard was not, strictly speaking, a sensible plan. She began to prepare for it anyway. She had just worked out that she could manage 4 of them in the inside pockets of her coat and carry the other 2 against her chest in the outer layer's belt if she cinched it a certain way when she heard the sound. Footsteps in new snow have a particular compression, a sound that is less a sound than a sensation, a rhythmic pressure, and it was that pressure that reached her first through the ice and granite of the cave wall. Then the crunch, unmistakable. Then more than one. Then a scent that came under the lip of the cave entrance on the changed wind, and Mara went very still, because the scent was not like anything she had encountered before, and she had encountered a great deal in her 4 years of wandering. It was cedar and cold iron and something else she had no word for, a bass note that was not quite animal and not quite mineral, but was entirely undeniably dominant. Alpha, but not merely alpha. Something beyond that, something with a register she could feel in her back teeth and in the particular animal hinge of her hindbrain that did not traffic in reason. She did not move. Beside her, Birch lifted its pale head and made a sound that was not quite a whimper and not quite a bark. It was a sound of recognition, she realized, and her stomach tightened with something adjacent to relief and something adjacent to fear. The entrance to the snow cave darkened. He did not come in immediately. He crouched at the entrance, and she could see the silhouette of him broad-shouldered, the kind of still that was not passive, but was a held force. The way a watershed is still even though every drop of water in it is going somewhere. Then he looked in, and the morning light was enough that she could see his eyes. They were the color of amber held against a lamp, and they stopped on her with a precision that she felt, physically, the way you feel the focus of a lens when light concentrates through it. He said nothing for a moment. She said nothing. Between them, January made the rasping sound that she had been monitoring all night, and the man's gaze dropped to the small bundle tucked against her collarbone, and something in his face shifted. She could not name what, exactly, because his face was the kind of face trained to reveal very little. Strong jaw, dark hair that the storm had complicated, a scar along the left cheekbone that had healed a long time ago. He wore a heavy coat, gray-black, and she could see 2 others behind him, large, watchful, stationary in the way of guards who had been told to hold position. "How long?" he said. His voice was low and even, and had the quality of stone that has been warm for a long time. It held heat without seeming to generate it. "Since last night," she said. Her voice was steadier than she had expected. "Before the storm fully closed in, I found them on the upper shelf." He looked at her, then at the pups, then back at her, and she had the disorienting sensation of being assessed by a system of measurement she did not know the units of. "All living," he said, It was not quite a question. All living, she confirmed. January, the small one, has a respiratory catch I've been watching. She'll need a healer. I'm a healer's assistant. I've been keeping her clear as best I can. He had already extended his hand toward the cave entrance, and she understood, without being told, that he was scenting her. It was not an intrusive gesture. It was precise, almost clinical. Except that his eyes during it were anything but clinical. They were very bright and very still, and entirely focused on her face in a way that made her aware of every point at which she was in contact with the ground beneath her. Mara Solis, he said. She went rigid. He said it the way you say a thing you have known for some time, not the way you say a thing you have just discovered. He said it with a certainty that had no performance in it, and the sound of her own name in that voice did something to her that she was not prepared to examine while sitting in a snow cave with 6 werewolf pups in her lap. You know my name, she said. It was not eloquent, but it was accurate. I know several things about you, he said. We can discuss them when you're not sitting on the ground in the aftermath of a blizzard. He rose from his crouch, and the gesture he made to the 2 guards behind him was small and unhurried. My name is Caius Dren. These are my sister's children. He said it without drama. He said it the way you say a thing that is simply true, and the simplicity of it was what made it land the hardest. His sister's children. She had spent the night with her body wrapped around the children of someone who was grieving, she understood suddenly. And the understanding opened something in her chest that was not comfortable at all. Your sister, she started, is not with us, he said. His voice did not change. It simply carried the information and moved past it, the way a river carries what falls into it. She was separated from the pups 2 days ago in the early edge of the storm. We have been searching since then. Mara looked at the pups, Birch, Dusk, River, Stone, Summit, January, and thought about 2 days and 2 nights. And the particular character of this pup's determination to climb her as if she were a hill. They are unharmed, she said. They are cold and hungry, and January needs attention, but they are unharmed. He looked at her for a moment that was longer than the preceding moments, and she felt it differently, not as scrutiny, but as something she had no clean word for. Then he said, Yes, I can see that. It was not a small thing, she would understand later. It was not a casual observation. But she did not understand that yet, sitting in the snow cave. So she simply began the process of detaching pups from her coat and her lap and her belt, and handed them up to him one by one, and he took each one with a careful competence that surprised her until it didn't, because she was realizing very quickly that everything about this man was more careful than it first appeared. Birch he held against his chest with his left arm while he took Dusk in his right hand. River and Stone he passed to the nearest guard, who received them with a gentleness that was its own form of telling. Summit he caught mid-scramble. The pup was already attempting to climb him, undaunted as ever, and a sound came from Caius Dren's chest that she thought she might have imagined, except that she had very good ears, and it was the kind of sound that a person makes when they are not expecting to make a sound at all. January he held for a moment before passing her. He listened to the small rasp. Then he looked at Mara with an expression she could not decode. You named them, he said. She had not realized she had said any of the names aloud. But she must have, in the night, in the murmuring. She must have called them by her small private names without knowing it. And he had heard them in the cave entrance and catalogued them. Because he was that kind of person, she was already certain of it. Working names, she said, with a dignity she had to reach for the night. He did not say anything. He passed January gently to the second guard and then extended his hand to her, and she looked at it for a moment, a large hand, scarred at the knuckle on the forefinger, warm even in the cold. She could see from the lack of redness, and she took it. And he drew her out of the cave and up into the morning. And the world exploded around her in white and blue and the blinding flat light of high-altitude post-storm, and she had to close her eyes for a moment because she had been in the dark a long time. When she opened them, he was still holding her hand. He released it a breath after she registered that, but she registered that he released it a breath late. She filed it carefully in the part of her mind where she kept things she did not yet know what to do with. They made their way down the ridge in a configuration that Mara understood, slowly, was not casual. The two guards flanked wide and ahead, breaking trail, and Caius Dren walked beside her, not behind her, which meant he was not treating her as a charge or a problem to be managed, but as something else. The pups were distributed between the guards and him, and January was tucked inside his coat now against the warmth of his body, and Mara's hands felt strange and empty without her. She did not say this. She said instead, "How far is your camp?" "An hour in clear conditions," he said. "Perhaps 90 minutes given the snow depth." She nodded. She was good at walking. She had been walking for 4 years. "You were heading to Vorn," he said. Not a question. She stopped walking. Not dramatically, she simply stopped, mid-stride, and looked at him. And he turned to look at her with the patience of someone who had been expecting her to stop. "You said you know several things about me," she said. "I did." "How?" He considered the question with the same quality of attention he had given everything else: thorough, unhurried, slightly too perceptive to be comfortable. "The Ashvale Council filed a territorial displacement notice when they rejected your ward status," he said. "That notice is logged with every regional authority in the Mountain Territories. I review those logs." "Why," she said, "would the Alpha King of the Keldrath Territories review displacement notices for rejected Omegas?" The title landed between them like a stone in still water. She had said it deliberately. She had put it together during the descent. The pieces assembling themselves with a quiet inevitability that felt less like discovery and more like recognition of something she had already known before she knew it: the guards. The pups with no visible pack markers, but a scent that suggested lineage of significant weight. The way the two guards moved, not like escorts, but like men who had given their lives to protecting a particular point in space. The scar, the steady eyes, the voice that had the quality of authority, that had been worn long enough to become invisible. He did not deny it. He looked at her with those amber-lit eyes and said, evenly, "Because it is my territory, and because I take an interest in what happens to the people within it." "I am not in your territory," she said. "I'm passing through." "The Keldrath Ridge is my territory," he said. "You have been within its borders since approximately 2 miles before the storm hit." She opened her mouth, closed it. Thought about 4 years of carefully navigating between territories, learning borders, respecting the invisible lines that determined whose jurisdiction she fell under at any given moment, and then thought about the map she had been using, which was 3 years old, and the border adjustments that sometimes happened when packs merged or dissolved, and the particular cold feeling of realizing you have made a navigational error that is now, apparently, consequential. "The Ashvale rejection," she started. "Is their business," he said. "Not mine. My territories do not recognize Ashvale's ranking conventions." He said it without heat, but with a finality that she felt was not for debate. "You sheltered my sister's children through a blizzard on your own body. Whatever your status in Ashvale's ledgers, in mine, it is something considerably different. She looked at him. He looked at her. The ridge stretched out around them, white and immense, and in the guard's arms January made the small rasping sound, and Mara heard it and automatically checked its rhythm steady. Slightly better than it had been an hour ago. The warmth was helping, and she noticed Caius Dren, noticing her check. "What happened to your sister?" she said. Not because she was entitled to know, but because she was a healer's assistant, and she needed to understand what the pups had lost before she could properly assess what they needed. His jaw tightened, just slightly. It was the first visible evidence of something underneath the control, and she noted it with the same care she brought to January's breathing. "Lena chose to shift when the storm hit," he said. "She thought the pack form would keep the pups safer. She had been traveling with only 2 guards, and they were separated in the whiteout. We found the guards. We have not yet found Lena." A pause. "We are still looking." She heard what he did not say. She heard the careful neutrality of still looking and what it was protecting. and she felt the hollow ache of it in her own chest. That particular grief of someone who loves a person and is not yet allowing themselves to know what they fear. She might have sheltered, Mara said. The way I sheltered. The ridge is granite, there are natural overhangs further north. I came from the north. I didn't pass a wolf, but the storm was... She stopped. She was in pack form. She would have been harder to shelter. She would have found a different route. He looked at her with an expression that she finally found a name for. It was the expression of a person receiving something they did not expect and do not quite know how to hold yet. Yes, he said. She would have. They walked. The guards broke trail ahead, and the distance between the ridge and the camp compressed the way distances always do when you are cold and tired, and the direction is downward. Mara walked and thought, and let the thinking happen at its own pace, which was how she worked best. She did not force the shape of things, but let them settle into the forms they wanted. She was in the territory of the Alpha King. She had not known that. She was technically in his protection now, by the rules that governed these mountain territories, which she knew in the general outline, if not the precise articles. She had sheltered his sister's children. He knew her name before she told it to him, and he had reviewed her displacement notice, which meant he had known she was in his territory before today, before the storm. Before this ridge, which meant the question of coincidence, was significantly more complicated than it had appeared on the surface of the morning. She looked at him sideways as they walked. He was watching the trail ahead, his hand at January's back through the fabric of his coat, a gesture so automatic that she was certain he was unaware of it. "How long have I been in Keldrath territory?" she said. "Since the fall equinox," he said without hesitating. "Approximately." She did a calculation. 4 months. "Yes." "And you have known this?" "Yes." She let the terrain swallow several of those seconds while she arranged what she wanted to say and the way she wanted to say it. "That is a long time," she said, "to review a displacement notice and take no action." He glanced at her. "I took action." "What action?" He looked forward again. "I ensured that the healer you assist did not have his transit permits revoked when he crossed the northern checkpoint with an undeclared passenger." A beat. 3 months ago. She had not known there was a checkpoint. She had not known her presence was undeclared. She had simply ridden in the back of Evander's cart and slept under his spare traveling blanket and arrived in the foothills without incident. And she had told herself that was because Evander knew these roads, which was true, and she had not considered what else might be true alongside it. "You intervened," she said. "Administratively," he said. "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment that was not a deflection but a deliberation. She watched him conduct it, the almost invisible working of something behind the composed exterior, the way the amber in his eyes went slightly deeper. "I had read your file," he said. "The Ashvale rejection was noted as unanimous. It was not unanimous. The vote was 7-5, and the 2 senior healers on the council voted against it. The notes on your training were exceptional. The grounds for rejection were not related to your conduct or capability." He paused. "They were related to your presentation." She had not spoken of this to anyone. She had packed it away very carefully, the way you pack a thing that cannot be repaired, and she had not been in the habit of taking it out. "I am a mid-register Omega," she said, "in a pack that prizes high register status. You are an Omega with healing gifts that the Ashvale Council classified as an administrative inconvenience," he said, with a flatness that told her what he thought of that classification. "Your scent profile presents as low assertion. It does not present as low capacity. The 2 things are not the same." She stopped walking again. He stopped with her, without drama, and the guards continued a few yards before realizing and also stopped, and January stirred inside Caius's coat and made a small sound. And Mara looked at the Alpha King of the Keldrath territories and felt something in her chest that had been compressed for 4 years and begin, very slowly, and without her permission, to loosen. "You read a displacement notice," she said, "and you distinguished between low assertion and low capacity." "It was evident from the healer's testimony in the record," he said. He was quite clear. Evander's testimony is in the record. Evander advocated for you, he said, loudly, by the notes. He lost. She had not known that either. Evander had never said. He had simply offered her work 2 weeks after the rejection ceremony, with the brisk practicality of a man who did not traffic in what he called unnecessary sentiment, and she had accepted with the brisk practicality of a woman who needed to keep moving. And they had never discussed what had happened in the council chamber. She had assumed he was simply practical. She had not known he had fought for her. She felt the sting of that behind her eyes and refused it, cleanly, because she was on a mountain in the aftermath of a blizzard, and this was not the time. I need to check January's breathing when we stop, she said. Yes, he said. We will stop soon. They walked. The camp materialized out of the white landscape with a suddenness that still caught her off guard. A cluster of heavy canvas structures in a clearing below the tree line, where the pines had broken the storm's force enough that the snow was a mere foot deep rather than the 3 and 4 feet she had been hauling through on the open ridge. There were more people here than she had expected. A dozen, perhaps 15. And they moved with coordinated purpose when the small party descended into the clearing, coming forward to take the pups, to bring warm wrappings, to speak in low, urgent voices to the guards who had broken trail. A woman in a brown healer's coat arrived at Caius's side within 30 seconds of their arrival, and he removed January from inside his coat and passed her over with a specific set of instructions in a low voice. And Mara heard him use the word January and felt a complicated pulse of something warm in her sternum. He turned to her immediately after. Come inside, he said. You need warmth and food. I need to see January, she said. The respiratory catch, the healer should know that it was worse at the coldest part of the night and improved with warmth, but the rattle is, come with me and you can tell her yourself, he said. She followed him into the largest of the structures, which was warm in the way that deeply, competently insulated spaces are warm, not excessive, but thorough, and the healer was already at a low table, with January spread on a soft pad, and Mara came to stand beside her and began immediately, because this was what she did. This was the thing she knew how to do better than almost anything else, and the healer was experienced and received her observations with the focused attention of a professional, and together, they worked through the assessment with the efficient quiet of 2 people who have both chosen, for different reasons, to make the care of small, vulnerable things their primary work. Caius stood back. She was aware of him standing back and felt it as a thing that cost him something, because these were his sister's children and every instinct he had was almost certainly pulling him toward the center of the room, and he was holding himself at the perimeter to give her space to work, and she was aware of that choice, with the part of her mind that was always, whether she wanted it to be or not, tracking the behavior of the people around her. January was going to be fine. The healer confirmed it with the same words Mara had been carrying in her mind all night as a quiet conviction fine, a slight upper respiratory inflammation from cold exposure. Nothing that warmth and rest and proper feeding would not address in 2 to 3 days. The relief was physical. She felt it in her joints. The other 5 were brought in one by one and assessed and fed and settled into a warm nest of blankets that someone had prepared with the speed of a camp that was accustomed to emergency and knew how to respond to it. Birch was curled at the center immediately, imperious even in infancy. Dusk pressed into the corner. River and Stone arranged themselves with their habitual precision. Summit attempted to climb the edge of the nest and was replaced inside it 3 times before giving up, temporarily. She watched them, standing with a bowl of broth that someone had pressed into her hands, and thought about how she had named them, and how she had said working names, as if that made them less real, and how she had felt when she handed them up out of the cave, one by one in the morning light. You are thinking about the pups, Caius Dren said. He was standing beside her. She had not heard him move, which should have been impossible, and probably was, and the closeness of him without warning made her aware of her own breathing in a way that was inconvenient. I was thinking, she said carefully, that they are going to need consistent care for the next several days. Yes, he said. and that January specifically should not be moved in cold conditions until the inflammation is fully resolved. No, he agreed. And that I am a healer's assistant, she said, which means I am qualified to provide that care. She was not quite sure what she was offering. She was not quite sure why she was offering it. She looked at the 6 pups in their nest, and January's slightly ragged small breath, and the pale flash of Birch's fur, and the 2 that had always curled together, as if even in the cold they had been practicing a lifelong habit. And she was aware that the names she had given them in the dark had done something that names always do, which is create a connection that does not dissolve, simply because the night is over. I know you are, he said. You told me that in the cave. You also told me you were on your way to Vorn. I am on my way to Vorn, she said, eventually. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, there is a healer's position in the Keldrath settlement. It has been vacant since the autumn. The previous assistant took a posting in the Eastern Territories. She looked at him. It would not require you to be on your way anywhere, he said. It would require you to be here. The warmth of the shelter and the broth and the released tension of the night were doing something to her defenses. She could feel them doing it. She had spent 4 years building a particular structure of self, brisk and capable and ready to move. Always ready to move, because movement was what you did when staying was not an option. And staying had not been an option for so long that she had stopped distinguishing it from preference. I have a prior commitment to Vorn, she said. Evander's contract, he said. Yes. I could release the family from the obligation if you prefer to honor it. Or I could offer them a position here as well. Evander is skilled. We are short-staffed. She stared at him. You are offering to move my employer. I am offering him an opportunity, he said. Whether he takes it is his choice, as it is yours. She turned to look at him fully, which was something she had been managing in increments until now. Looking at him directly, and at length, was the kind of thing she had been carefully not doing, for reasons she had not yet allowed herself to examine. He was looking back at her with the same quality of attention that he had brought to everything this morning, thorough, unhurried, and with a register underneath the steadiness that she was not misreading. She had good instincts. She had relied on them through 4 years of not being able to rely on much else, and her instincts were telling her several things at once. And the loudest of them was that this man had read a displacement notice 4 months ago, and then quietly ensured that she could keep working, and then gone looking for her in the aftermath of a blizzard, and had known her name before she offered it. You were looking for me, she said, before the pups, before the storm. He did not look away. I was planning to request an introduction, he said, through Evander, in the spring. The spring, she repeated. When you were settled, he said. And not in the middle of a difficult season of traveling. She thought about the spring and what it would have looked like a formal introduction, Evander playing some kind of intermediary role he would have enormously resented being described as, and this man arriving with his careful attention and his amber eyes and his improbable knowledge of her displacement notice, and offering her something in the deliberate, unhurried way that seemed to be the only way he did anything. She thought about what she would have thought of it in the spring versus what she thought of it now. Standing in his camp with her coat still damp from the snow cave and her hands still carrying the phantom weight of 6 small bodies. You were going to wait, she said. Yes. That is a very long time to wait. You had just come through a difficult winter, he said. I thought you deserved the spring first. She had not expected that. It landed in the exact space where the pressure behind her sternum had lived since she was 22. The space shaped like being told you are not enough, and it did something to that space, did not fill it. Exactly, but changed its dimensions, made it less like a wound and more like a room that had been closed for a long time, and was now, slowly, being opened to light. I don't know what you think I am, she said. I should tell you that. I don't know what you've read in a displacement notice, but I am a rejected omega from a pack that thought I wasn't worth keeping. I am a capable pair of hands and an acceptable healer's assistant, and I am very good at moving through difficult terrain in bad weather. as evidenced by this morning. I don't know what you. She stopped, because she was running into the edge of something she did not have clean words for. He waited. He waited with that thoroughness that was not patience in the passive sense, but was more like the patience of water that knows where it is going and does not require you to hurry. I am aware, he said, when she stopped, of what you are. You can't possibly. You are an Omega with healing gifts who spent a night underground in a blizzard using her own body heat to keep 6 pups alive because she heard one whimper, and she is not the kind of woman who keeps walking. He said it in the same even voice he used for everything. But underneath it was a weight that was not even at all. It was dense and deliberate, and she felt it on her skin, the way you feel sunlight when you have been cold a very long time. The Ashvale Council valued presentation. I value what I just described. Those are not the same value system. She looked at the pups. January was sleeping, her small chest rising and falling with a steadiness that was still slightly ragged but was going in the right direction, and the sound was the most ordinary and most important sound in the room. She had been not the kind of woman who kept walking her entire life. She had always thought of it as a failing. She had always thought of it as the thing that made her inconvenient, the thing that made her low assertion, the thing that the Ashvale Council had noted in their ledger as insufficient, too responsive, too available, too willing to stop for whimpers in storms, too Omega, they had meant, by their definition of the word. She looked at Kayastren and thought about how he had said it not in the diminishing tones she had trained herself to expect whenever her nature was described, but with a specificity that left no room for diminishment, that catalogued what she had done and named it plainly as a value, not a liability. You are the Alpha King, she said. I am a wandering healer's assistant with no pack affiliation and no territory of my own. You are in my territory, he said. You have been for 4 months. A pause. You are welcome to stay in it. As a healer's assistant, she said. For as long as that is what you want to be called, he said. The room was warm. Outside, she could hear the camp reassembling itself around the new day. The sounds of a functioning community moving through familiar tasks, the low voices, and the crunch of boots in snow, and somewhere, distantly, the specific sound of wood being split for fires. She had not been part of a community in 4 years. She had moved between them, grateful for what they offered, and careful never to want more than what was on offer. January, she said. She'll need monitoring through the night. The healer will monitor her. 2 sets of eyes, she said, are better than 1, for the first few nights. He looked at her for a long time. Yes, he said, they are. She took another sip of the broth, which had gone slightly cool but was still warm enough to do what it needed to do. She thought about Vorn, and the family there, and the board and room they had promised, and the careful, neutral life she had been assembling. She thought about the spring that this man had been planning to give her, the consideration of it, the thought that she might deserve a season to rest before she was asked to want something. She thought about the snow cave and the dark and 6 small heartbeats arranged around her in the cold, and how she had not once thought about the cost of warmth she was giving away. Because the calculus of that night had been perfectly simple. They needed warmth. She had warmth. The rest was arithmetic. She wondered if he was doing a version of the same calculation right now. She thought, carefully, that he might be. I'll need a space with good light for the medical work, she said, and access to the supply stores. And I'll want to speak with Evander before any conversation about moving his posting, because he is not a man who responds well to feeling managed. Noted, Kayastren said. She thought she heard something underneath that word that was not quite amusement and not quite relief, but was close to both. And I want to know when there is news about Lena, she said, quieter. Good or bad? I want to know. The quality of the silence changed. He looked at her with the amber eyes in which something moved, not the controlled steadiness she had been reading all morning, but something underneath it. Something that had been held for 2 days in the searching, and the not finding, and the still looking. Yes, he said. You will be told. She nodded. She looked at the pups one more time. Her working names laid gently over 6 small bodies that already felt like something she had a responsibility toward. Not because anyone had assigned it to her, but because she had breathed with them through the dark, and that she had always known was how you became responsible for something. The days that followed were the kind of days that build a life without advertising the fact that they are doing it. Lena was found on the 3rd day, alive, hunkered down in a natural granite overhang 7 miles north of the ridge, exactly where Mara had suggested they look. And the news arrived in the medical tent while Mara was changing January's damp compress, and she heard the runner's voice break with relief and pressed her hand flat against January's small, warm side and closed her eyes for a moment and simply breathed. She heard, from across the camp, a sound that was not carried by the wind but reached her anyway. A single exhaled sound that was nothing like any sound she had heard Caius Dren make before, and everything like what she would have predicted if she had known him longer, which was that the thing he had been holding for 3 days would, when released, sound like that. January's inflammation cleared on the 5th day. She announced this to Caius over the morning fire, and he listened with the full quality of his attention, and then asked 3 precise and excellent questions about her recovery trajectory, and she answered them, and they talked for an hour before either of them noticed it had been an hour. Evander arrived on the 8th day. Having received a message she still was not entirely sure how had been composed without her involvement, and walked into the camp with the expression of a man performing skepticism over a substructure of intense interest, and spent the rest of the day asking questions of the senior healer that were, she recognized, the questions of a man who was already deciding. He said nothing to her about it except, at the end of the day, a brief and characteristic, "The mountain stores are better stocked than I expected," which, from Evander, was as close to enthusiasm as anyone who had not known him for years would have been able to read. She began to learn the camp, and then the settlement below the camp, because when the weather cleared enough to travel, the whole operation moved downward, with a practiced efficiency that told her this was not an emergency posting, but a regular seasonal pattern. The settlement was larger than she had imagined from the ridge. It was a proper community, perhaps 400 people, with the layered complexity of a place that had been inhabited for generations. Stone buildings and cedar-beamed halls, and a market square that was dormant under the winter's end, but would be, she could see from the structure of it, genuinely animated in the spring. She was given a space in the healing hall that had, as she had specified, good light. She arranged it according to her own logic, which Evander respected and occasionally reorganized when she was not looking, and she stopped noticing when he changed things because she would just change them back. And eventually he stopped changing them, which was the way their working relationship had always functioned, and was comforting in its familiarity. Caius came to the healing hall on the 3rd day after their arrival in the settlement, not for any medical reason that he specified. He came in the mid-morning and stood in the good light and asked her what she was working on, and she was cataloging the supply stores, and so she told him. And he listened with the specific quality of attention that she was learning was his default mode and not a performance of interest, and then he asked about the gaps in the catalog. And they talked through the supply situation, and he left 2 hours later with a list of things to arrange for restocking that she had somehow ended up writing while they talked. On the 5th day, he came back. On the 7th day, on the 9th, she began to expect him in the mid-morning light without tracking when she had started. And she noticed this, and considered whether it was a problem, and decided, with the practicality that had served her through 4 years of difficult terrain, that a thing that was not a problem should not be treated as one simply because she was not used to it. The pups grew. They grew with the explosive velocity of the very young, and they were in the healing hall more often than was strictly medically necessary, because January had established a proprietary relationship with the corner of Mara's workspace where the light was warmest. And where January was, the others followed, with the exception of Dusk, who maintained a careful solitude that was clearly a pose because he could always be found within 3 feet of Birch. Summit continued to attempt to climb everything. River and Stone continued to operate as a unit. Mara continued to call them by her working names, which the pups had by now clearly accepted as their actual names, which meant that Lena, when she arrived at the settlement on the 12th day, walked into the healing hall, and was informed by her brother that her children were called Birch, Dusk, River, Stone, Summit, and January, and the expression on her face was a compound of several things. And she looked at Mara across the hall with wide eyes that were the same amber as Caius's, and then she laughed a full, unguarded laugh that Mara thought was probably one of the most beautiful sounds she had heard in a long time, and she felt her face do something warm and involuntary in response. Lena embraced her before she said a single word. She wrapped both arms around Mara with the impulsive force of someone whose instincts were not held at the same careful interior distance as her brother's. And Mara stood very still for a moment in the unfamiliar weight of it, and then she hugged her back, properly, and felt something in herself that had been holding a particular rigid shape for years. Simply release. "She is not the kind of woman who keeps walking," Caius said from the doorway, and Mara looked up and met his eyes, and he was watching her with an expression she had learned to read by now. In the 13 days since the snow cave, which was the expression of a man who knew exactly what he was looking at and had been waiting, with characteristic patience, for the right moment to say so, she thought she ought to say something sharp, or at least something measured. Instead, what she said was, "You should really announce yourself when you come in," which was not sharp or measured, but was honest, which was what she had always defaulted to when all other options failed. "Noted," he said. And there it was again, the thing that was not quite amusement and not quite relief, but was close to both. And this time, she did not prevent herself from feeling it in return. The winter gave way, the way the Keldrath ridge always gave way, not gradually, the way winters are supposed to end, but in a single sweeping decision, overnight. As if the mountain had concluded that cold had had its season, and it was time for something else. Mara woke one morning to the sound of water, which was snow leaving the roof, and stones and windowsills, running in the narrow channels that the settlement had built for exactly this purpose. And the light through the healing hall's good windows was different. It had the particular gold of early spring at altitude, which is not the same gold as any other season's light. She was sitting in that light when Caius arrived, mid-morning as usual, and she had a cup of tea and a list she had been working on. And he came in and stood in the good light and looked at her with his careful amber eyes. "Evander has accepted the posting," he said, "formally, as of this morning." "I know," she said. "He told me last night. He made it sound like a concession." "He is going to be an asset," Caius said. "He is going to drive your senior healer to distraction and then somehow make everything run better," she said. "Yes, that is what he does." He looked at her. She looked at him. In the corner where the light was warmest, January made a small, contented sound and resettled herself with the absolute self-possession of a creature who has decided she lives here, and whose breathing was as clear and steady as the spring morning. Not a trace of winter's catch left in her, just the clean, deep breath of something that has come through and arrived at the other side. "You stayed," he said. It was not an observation or a reproach. It was simply the name of what she had done, spoken in the voice that always gave things their exact weight. "I didn't keep walking," she said. She meant it to come out as a small joke, a self-deprecating deflection, the kind she had always been good at, but it came out as something simpler and truer than that. And she felt the truth of it in the way she felt the spring light, as a warmth that had been absent long enough that she had stopped expecting it. He crossed the room and sat in the chair that was not her chair but had become, over 13 days of mid-morning conversations, demonstrably his chair, and he set his hands on the table between them and looked at her with the full quality of everything he had kept, careful and controlled, and at a considered distance since the morning on the ridge. "You are the keeper of the Keldrath Healing Hall," he said, "if you want to be called that." It was the title. It was specific, and it was permanent. And it was a thing that belonged to the settlement in the ledgers that everyone could read, which meant it was also a statement in a language that did not require her to be uncertain of its meaning. She looked at his hands on the table. She thought about the snow cave and the dark and the names she had given in the dark, and how she had called them working names, and how the work had turned out to be permanent. She thought about 4 years of keeping moving and how it had prepared her, without her knowing it was doing so, for being precisely here, skilled enough in difficult terrain to have found the cave, stubborn enough in the cold to have stayed through it, practiced enough at keeping count of heartbeats that she had not lost a single one. She had thought her nature was a failing. She had been carrying the Ashvale Council's interpretation of her like a weight she was not allowed to set down. And the thing about weight carried long enough is that you forget it is not part of your body. You forget that it was placed there by someone else and can be removed by the same mechanism, which is simply the decision to no longer accept the placing. She was not insufficient. She was exactly what she was. She was an Omega who heard whimpers in storms and went toward them. And the Alpha King of the Keldrath territories had read her displacement notice 4 months ago and recognized that as the precise quality he had been keeping a position vacant for, and had waited through a winter to give her the spring first. And here was the spring. "I want to be called that," she said. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and January breathed in the warm corner, and the snowmelt ran in the channels outside the window. And somewhere in the settlement, someone was doing something with a door that the warming wood had swollen in its frame, and the sound of it was the most ordinary sound in the world. He reached across the table, and she placed her hand in his, and the contact was the specific warmth of 2 things that have found the right temperature. Not too much, not too little, simply the warmth that is left when everything unnecessary has been released to the morning, and spring opened over the Keldrath settlement like a sentence that had always been true, and had only been waiting for the right moment to be said aloud.